just a little bit of housekeeping, and then we will go right into it. So with the recording, everyone who signed up for this webinar, whether you are here for the live event or you're not able to make it, everyone who signed up receives a recording of this webinar, and it's all on YouTube. So I will send you an email with a link to the video on YouTube, and you will be able to then watch the video as much as you want. It will always be at that link, so you will always see it, no matter what I do as far as updating my website, anything like that. As long as you have that email and have that link, you will always be able to go back, watch this recording, read, listen to this recording and everything. So you'll have it for your entire life. One thing that I am doing differently with my webinars now is I will not be offering purchasing of the webinars after the fact, as far as, be able to purchase webinars from, a year ago or all that sort of good stuff. So make sure and tell your friends to sign up, even if they're not going to be here, because it's just a bookkeeping nightmare for my end with the past webinars. So I'm going to change that a little bit. As far as questions, depending on how detailed the questions are, I tend to take questions kind of as they come, because it's a little bit easier to ask them in the moment, as opposed to I used to do them at the end of the webinar. And what happened when I did them at the end is somebody be asking a question from the very beginning of the webinar, and that's been 45 minutes. And so either the question might be lost, or we might have to do a lot of describing of what the question is. So it's a little bit easier if we just go ahead. If you have a question, type it into the chat box. I might finish my train of thought that I'm currently talking about, and then I'll get to your question, but I think it'll be a little bit easier to just kind of ask them as we go. So that's a little bit of a new format that I'm trying with this webinar. So let's go ahead and get going. What this webinar is covering is how I teach sends and also turnaways or switches. I've begun calling my switches turnaways just because it's easier. There's so many different verbals for a turnaway or a switch, and sometimes when I refer to them just as a switch, it gets lost in translation a little bit. So I've called them turnaways because that seems to make sense and everybody understands what's happening. Hey, why don't you lay down, Trip? Good boy. And so the turnaway is basically kind of the same thing as your switch. And then a send is just exactly what it sounds like. It's going to be a send. For this webinar, I mostly am using hoops and jumps as my obstacles for all the diagrams, but we'll talk about using all sorts of different equipment. So this is going to be super weird, but I'm going to pause this for 1 second because I am pretty sure Trip really needs to go outside. So it's so weird. I'm really sorry. So I'm going to turn the audio off for just 1 second. Let me whip him outside, and then we'll get started again. I am so sorry. All right, so we had a bit of a code red emergency there. He's much happier now. And I was sitting here looking at his sad little face. I'm like, oh, I really think I have to go. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about are sends. So a send is, for the most part, sends, and in my opinion, the ones that are really hard to do are vertical sends. I also refer to them as dead sends, which just basically means your dog is sending out ahead of you. So in this diagram, we're going to talk about targeting. We've got our little stick figure dude here, our little dog. This is a hoop, and this is the target. Now, the way I teach SENS, it's not sexy. It's not fancy. There is no magical wand. There is no, you know, I don't know, magic training tool that that teaches Ascend. I'm pretty old school when it comes to how I teach my distance work. When it comes to how I teach my sequencing, I still use targeting. I know there are a lot of other cooler, fancier, more hip things to do. I stick with targeting. It's what's worked with me or for me. It's what I like. It's what's proven itself to me over the years with my own dogs and my students' dogs. So I tend to stick with my targeting. Now, a target could be either a piece of food. It could be a toy. Lie down. Lie down. It could be anything of that nature, whatever your dog wants to target to. So, for instance, how you use your toys, and this is going to dive off the subject for a minute, but how you use your reward depends on what you're looking for from your dog. So we're going to take Trip, for instance. Trip is extremely toy motivated, loves his toys. They're fantastic, but they also kind of bring him over the top to the point where he's not learning anymore. He's just going and chasing toys, okay? So I will use toys in some of his training when I really need him to just drive out there, right? Like I'm working on extreme distance work, I'm working on stake stuff, and I really want that oomph and that drive out, far away obstacles. But if I work too much with the toy, there's a fine line there. If I work too much with the toy, he's not learning anymore. He is just so far gone into that toy that his over-arousal, he's in a state of over-arousal, and we're not learning anymore. And it's just all about, blazing a path to the toy. So when I did these SENS with him, I did use a target. Now, I have two different methods of targeting. You can use the classic food on a plate. I've used that with my dogs. I like it. It's a good method, but it has to be used properly. And it's probably one of the methods that I see used improperly over and over and over again. What I generally see is we stick a plate out there, we stick food on it, we set our dogs up, and we target, right? And we're setting them, I don't know if you can see my little cursor, but we always send them through the hoop to the target, through the hoop to the target, right? And then the handler's like, oh my gosh, I can now send my dog 60 feet through 3 hoops to food on a plate. And we're going to get to that diagram here in just a second, but we can send our dog all that way, and then the target is just removed. And good targeting, good, clean targeting, the target should be slowly faded away, okay? So as you're going through all this stuff, as you're moving through the steps with your targeting, you should be slowly fading that target away. That target then becomes, let's say, for simplicity's sake, it's after hoop number 2. Then it's after hoop number 3, 6, 8, 10, until it's after the last obstacle, the last hoop. It's the finished target, right? And then that target then becomes the treat back at their crate. That's the kind of fading I like to do in that respect. I want nice fading of that target so my dog is still driving to those obstacles, not just, oh, hey, look, I'm learning to run through 3 hoops and eat food off a plate, which is sometimes what happens with targeting, and why people, I feel, get frustrated with it, is because if we take it away too soon or we leave it too long, bad things can happen on either end of that spectrum. If we leave that food on a plate for too long, right, then our dogs aren't so much learning to do 3 hoops to a target. They're learning, I run through these things and I get some food, and I run through here and I get some food, but they're not processing, oh, hey, I'm doing these 3 hoops and then I get my target, right? My next method of targeting, what I use quite a bit, is I absolutely love Julie Daniels. I highly recommend, if you don't know who she is or barely know who she is, please go check her out. She teaches with Fenzi Dog Sports. That's the easiest way to get access to all of her information and all of her classes, and she's fabulous. A lot of my training is based off of Julie Daniels' work. And one of the things she does that I've incorporated, and I tweak a little bit, I think every training method we tweak it a little bit to make it work for us and our dogs, is her magic mat. She uses her magic mat as a calming place. She uses her magic mat for start lines, for targeting, for boundary games, all that sort of stuff. So it's basically a bath mat, a bed, whatever you want to use, and you teach your dog to target to that mat. And they can go and they can sit on it, lie down, stand, whatever works. But you're basically teaching a body target. You're teaching them to go and get on that mat. So there's no food on a plate. There's no food on a mat. You're teaching the dog to go to that mat and target to it. And that's a whole nother webinar of teaching magic mat stuff and all that. But you can use different kinds of targeting, whether it's going to be a ball on the ground, food on a plate, if you're going to do a magic mat type thing, to have your dog go and sit or stand on that mat. Anything like that is perfect for any kind of targeting. Excuse me. So once you've figured out what kind of targeting you want to do, what works best for you and your dog, now we need to start working with our sends. So I generally start doing sends and this kind of work once my dog is already sequencing. You know, my dog understands how to go through hoops. I've built value for that equipment. If you don't have hoops, you can use jumps. But I've built value for that piece of equipment, and they understand the purpose of going through it. Now, oh, excuse me, good Lord. Now, I want to start teaching my dog, and my goal, because one of my goals is distance work, so I like to do distance work. So a goal for me when I'm doing my sends is that my dog is going to drive 3 to 4 pieces of equipment straight away from me, a vertical send. Now, there are lateral sends that you and your dog are moving together. That's lateral distance. But I want to focus on vertical distance, which I feel is much harder to attain. In the beginning, and anybody who's been to my seminars or even my previous webinars know that my big thing is that when I start distance work with my dogs, Allie, could you maybe, hey Al, let's not ruin the living room, okay? That's awesome. It's like the dogs know I'm in the middle of something and I can't do anything, and so they've taken every toy out of the box and they're just, I mean, it's a massacre in the living room right now. So with a vertical send, I'm going to start with, like I was saying, when I'm, you know, anybody who's attended seminars with me, I start with my dogs. Everything about my distance work and my training, I want my dogs to have tons of confidence, right? And so I do start with them. I start with them and help them. Just like any behavior we teach our dog, just like anything, any skill you're teaching your dog, you want to get in there and help your dog. So I do start with them. So let's take our hoop and target, for example. I'm not going to just stand dead back here like this little stick person is, right? I'm going to take a step towards that hoop. I'm going to move up here with the dog and to target, right? With my goal, remember, we want to break things down. You don't want to lump behaviors together. So you want to break things down. So my goal being that eventually, before I move on to my next step, is that I am able to stand back here where this little stick person is, and my dog will drive hoop to target, right? And never look back at me, confident, happy, driving that hoop to target. That's what I'm looking for. Try very hard to split all your behaviors. I highly recommend Hannah Brannigan's podcast. She has, I don't remember which one it is, but she does talk about splitting behaviors, and it's very relevant, especially to this discussion, as well as almost everything in agility. You want to break the behaviors down into small pieces. So before I decide I want to move forward from this, I want my dog to be able to drive hoop to that target, and I want to work around the clock, which basically means I want to handle this from all around that hoop where that yellow line is. I want to be able to stand anywhere through there, and my dog will drive to that hoop. I might even want to come back here and do the same thing around, oh, that's a terrible line, around the clock, to where now my dog is driving an even further distance. So we're going to move on to our next diagram here. Now we've added 2 hoops. Now you'll notice that my spacing is close, and that is for a reason. I want my dogs to have instant success. right? And I do primarily NADAC, so it's generally about 21 feet in between between pieces of equipment. And for some dogs, that can be extremely demotivating. And heck, even to the high drive border collies, when you're working on distance stuff, you really need to bring the equipment closer and build that confidence close and then spread it out to that 21 feet. So I start with my hoops pretty dang close. I don't have a specific distance. I just try to start with them as close as I can. Hold on for 1 second. Could you let him out? Thank you. Oh, good. The code red dog is finally outside. So I start with everything close because I want to build that high rate of success. I want my dog to do these things and be like, yes, one stride into the next hoop and onto my target. This is extremely beneficial for dogs who maybe need more motivation. For small dogs, I mean, when you think about some poor little Chihuahua, how far 21 feet is between two pieces of equipment. I tend to do all of my training with my obstacles brought in pretty dang close. I want my dogs to have instant success. So same thing here. I'm standing here with my little stick dog. We've got 2 hoops to the target. Now in the beginning, right, my dog has done 1 hoop to the target. I'm going to move up here. I'm going to run with my dog up to that 2nd hoop, target. And then I'm going to slowly, maybe now this time, I'm going to run just up to that 20 mark line. My dog goes on without me to the target. And now maybe I move to right here. Okay? And then the next time I'm only to here. And then maybe next time I'm going to start back here and I'm going to work around the clock again. Right? So my dog is doing these nice sends up to that target and I'm adding more and more distance. Now, any time your dog starts to flounder, and this is key. Again, anybody who's done seminars with me are just sick and tired of hearing this. But if your dog so much as hesitates a step, kind of looks at you and goes, I don't know, that's a long ways away, move. Get in there and help your dog. As soon as my dogs get a look or they start to just twitch a little bit and they look like perhaps they're feeling a little bit insecure about that distance, oh my gosh, here I come. And I'm going to take a couple of steps and support that dog. The more you do that, the more confidence you build, more confidence you have, the greater distance you have. So again, here we are at this step. We've got small spacing between these hoops. Remember, we don't want to lump all the skills together, so we're going to break this down. So once my dog is doing this drive really nice, I can work around the clock. He never needs my help. He is just driving like a good thing. We're going to add more and more space. Now, this is a pretty big jump between space. You know, I tend to move things about 4 to 5 feet at a time, but you're just going to keep moving your hoops back. Either, you know, move your start line hoop back, move this hoop and target forward, however you want to do it. There's no rhyme or reason. But just start adding some space where now your dog is sending to the target, and you're still doing the same thing. You might come up in here and help him a few times, and then you slowly work to where you're back here, and then maybe back here. Once again, working that round the clock and sending your dog up to that target. I want you to work every handling position imaginable, right? I want you to work this whole around the clock. I want you to come stand over here and send, stand over here and send. Heck, even come up here, even though it's not a send anymore, but get some distance on it and send your dog to that target. Work every handling position. And like I said at the beginning of this webinar, what I do isn't sexy, fancy work, man. It's just good old targeting. And I'm all about building confidence for dogs, and this is what I love about building confidence for dogs with targeting is, for me and my dogs, this is what works for us. The next thing I want to look at is you're going to add some different sequences, right? So you'll notice I've added a 3rd hoop, and we've angled it ever slightly. So with that angled hoop, you're going to notice the distance is really short between these two. And then I kind of place the target up here at an angle. So we're still doing the same send. And again, get up here and help your dog if you need to. But we're still doing the same send, but then we've shortened the distance between these 2 hoops and into that target. So once again, we're doing that small distance, high rate of reinforcement, and be able to get all of that into that dog. So it's going to be the same, kind of the same thing, is once my dog is really driving up and doing this kind of soft curve, right? And I can stand back, whatever my goal distance may be, I can stand back in here. Then I'm going to take this hoop and target, and we're going to move it out. So we're adding that goal distance. We want to get to where we are adding in, you know, whatever venue it is you want to do. But for me, it'd be 20 feet for NADAC. We're getting in that 20 feet. Marcy, what if your dog does this, but that space between is so short that their speed takes them around the last hoop? So then move your hoops, right? So if you've got a dog that they're hauling through these two hoops, right, and they're, you know, their stride, they're a bigger dog, longer dog, whatever it may be, and their stride takes them like that up around the hoop, take this hoop here, move it up and out just a little bit. Adjust for the stride. Same with if you've got a really tiny dog, you know, then you would adjust these hoops to what works. But if you've got a bigger dog or a fast dog, whichever it may be, and you need to move that hoop up, then definitely move it up. Adjust things for your dog. My rule of thumb is I never let my dog make a quote-unquote mistake more than 3 times. So if something's happened once, right, I just kind of, okay, let's go try it again. Now that they've done the same thing a second time, I'm going to kind of look at my dog and go, okay, is my dog just not getting it? Am I moving too fast? Did I lump behaviors together? And I might readjust it. I tend to readjust after a second mess up, but definitely if my dog does it 3 times, I'm changing something. Either I have set up my exercise wrong, or perhaps I've moved too fast. My dog has lost a little bit of confidence. So as a handler, I'm going to get up here and help, or adjust where my sequences and everything are. But I'm going to, you know, adjust something, whether it's my handling, whether it's the sequence itself, or whatever it may be. And you're, again, you know, I just have this one diagram, but you're going to, you know, change things around. You know, this hoop, you would put it over here as well, so they're working sends to the left and to the right. And just set up different sequences, but working on getting that dog to send up and away from you. And it's, like I said, it's what I call as a dead send, and it is something I really want to practice, especially, we're going to get into the second half of this little topic, is with little to no motion from you as a handler. Most dogs are very motion-based. They're very body language-based, so they key off the motion. Hence why classes like Gamblers, Chances, Fast, those can all be extremely difficult. In my opinion, and the reason for that is us as handlers, we get up on that line, and then we have no motion. We can't take any steps to send our dog. We can't move our lower body, which sends our dog. We can't do any of those things. And that's why, in my opinion, those classes, sometimes we have an issue with them, is because we don't have that motion. The easiest way to remedy that is to get yourself off that line. When I walk a course, I tend to walk it and give myself 5 to 8 feet off that Chances line, or that Gamblers, Fast, whatever it may be, off of that line. So then when I run it, I don't end up running right on top of the line. But the next thing is that sometimes there are just sequences, courses, things like that, that you can't help but be still. There's nothing else you can do. Depending on where the line is or how the course is set up, you just can't move. And so I want to practice these sends where I am just standing still and my dog will go on without me, and continue on. Now, talking about our targeting, we're going to make sure and go back. So I'm using all this targeting, but keeping in mind that this target is going to move, right? I'm going to keep fading it. So as I keep moving the equipment, the target is moving. My goal with that target is that it becomes something at the end of the run. And that applies for the magic mat. That applies for food on a plate. I want that target to move. I look at a target the same way I look at wires on a set of weave poles. If I'm using wires on the weave poles, if you leave those wires on too long, they become part of the poles, which is a common problem with weaving. Is if the wires are on too long, the dogs just view it as that's what the equipment looks like. and then we remove the wires, and the equipment has completely changed. The whole picture has changed. So with that target, I want to make sure and move that target around and work on fading it towards the end of my run, because it is not part of my agility course. It's not part of the sequence. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So we're going to move on to turnaways or switches. Again, I'm using a target, and I usually start with hoops. In this hoop here, I need to move. It needs to be just a wee bit closer. I tend, when I start my switches with hoops, these two hoops are almost touching the bases of them. Again, it's back to that instant reward, high rate of reinforcement. Now, back to like Marcy's question, if your dog is a bigger dog or a faster dog, you may have to space them out a little bit to make considerations for their stride. So, you know, kind of play with this little setup here. But a turnaway or a switch basically means exactly what it sounds, in the fact that I want my dog to turn away from me. And again, here's our target. You can use food on a plate, magic mat, whatever works for you. The dog is then going to, the goal of this exercise is that my dog will go through this hoop, and they're going to turn and hit that target. I, as a handler, am going to cue this first hoop, and then I'm going to begin a rear cross. So I'm changing sides on the dog. I'm crossing behind them to meet them at that target. And we want to work distance with this, because this, again, is a hard sequence in those distance classes, like chances or gamblers or fast. So I am applying the same thinking on this sequence as what I do when I'm working on my sends. I want to practice with my hoops or my jumps, wherever it may be, pretty nice and close, and then start to space them out as my dog becomes more proficient. And I want to start working on distance. You know, in the beginning, I'm crossing right behind my dog, and I'm meeting him right here at the target. Like, we are together the whole time. Eventually, I want to work towards where I can send my dog through that hoop, and I can kind of stay back here, right behind this 30 line, okay? Is that I'd be able to send my dog through that hoop, cross behind, and stay back in here. I can start working that distance. Now, if the hoops are a little hard, if you're having a dog who isn't quite understanding the side change, because switches can be hard, the dog doesn't quite understand, you can take the tops off of the hoops, and this is where sometimes using it with jumps is a little bit easier, because you can kind of lure with your hand through the wing of the, or through the stanchions of the jumps. But the tops of my hoops are not screwed down, so I can just pop the tops of my hoops off, and I can kind of lure a few times, and then I can put the tops of the hoops back on. You can also use a cone if you'd like. I have lots of videos on my YouTube that show me working switches with a cone. You can basically set a cone right here where this hoop is, and have your dog just do a switch around the cone, and you're able to lure a little easier because it's a smaller piece of equipment. So when we look at our next slide, as you can see, now I've moved our second hoop out a little bit. I've added more space, and it's the same thing with the sends. In the beginning, I'm going to send my dog and move with them, right? And I'm going to help them. But my goal is that I can start adding some distance to that switch. I can start staying further and further back and add just a little bit more distance. The next thing you want to practice is crossing in front of the hoop and behind it. So crossing behind it means that my dog has gone through the hoop, right? They're starting into the hoop. They're right here. And I'm crossing behind as my dog is entering the hoop, and we go together. Crossing in front of the hoop means my dog has come through the hoop and they've begun to turn on the ground, and I cross behind them on the ground after the hoop. And you want to practice both, because you're going to end up seeing both of those kind of sequences on courses. Doesn't matter what venue it is, you're going to see where sometimes it's more beneficial to cross on the ground behind your dog, and sometimes it's easier to cross, or more beneficial for the path, to cross behind the hoop and your dog as they're going through it. So it just kind of depends on where the course goes, what the next sequence is, and what you're looking to attain. So I want to practice both. And the same thing with the send. I am practicing my distance on this skill as well. Now, if my dog starts to, let's say they cut, okay, and that's a common thing that happens with switches. I start adding a little bit more distance, and my dog does the switch, but he cuts in on that hoop up there, right? And he just does this. I will change the angle of this hoop. Let me see if I can change the color of my pin. I don't know if I know how. No, I don't think I know how. So you have to switch to yellow. So where this is kind of a flat arc right here, if my dog is cutting, I want to make this hoop a little bit more visible. So I'll take and I'll angle it out a little bit more. So it's a little bit of an easier angle. And I can take this target and move it up here, right? And this will help my dog pick that hoop up. And then I just take that angle and I slowly, because remember, we don't want to lump behaviors together. We want to split. So then I will slowly take and move that hoop back to this angle that I'm looking for. If you have a dog that's kind of wanting to cut. It definitely happens as you add more distance. As you as a handler start to work further from back here, dogs will have a tendency to want to cut. Now, if your dog is cutting a lot, no matter what you do, no matter how you angle this, you bring it back in, whatever's happening, they're cutting a lot, you might want to go back and build value for the obstacles. And that is something that I see a lot in agility that gets kind of lost in translation, is that we build tons of value for harder things, and we don't really mean to. It's just because we work on them so much. So we tend to build tons of value for things like contacts, weave pulls, right? Because they're these big pieces of equipment, and we spend so much time teaching a contact behavior, teaching weaves, that we build value for them. But we tend to not build value for things like jumps or hoops. And sometimes we build value for things that we really shouldn't, such as tunnels. Because everybody loves to watch their dog run through tunnels with their puppies, and then we build a lot of value for that. And that's why I don't do this exercise with tunnels. I know there are lots of people who teach switches with tunnels, and the reason I do not is because I want my dog to look for these pieces of equipment. I want them to look for a jump and look for a hoop and not run to tunnels. Now, with that being said, if your dog is having a serious issue, they just cannot, you're still working back here with everything really close, and your dog is just having a really hard time figuring out that lead change, which definitely happens, then I would bring a tunnel out and just help them figure out what their body should do to make that turn, help them figure out how to switch leads, how to make that turn. Then I would probably bring a tunnel and put it right where this hoop is and let them learn how to make that turn. Now, once they've learned how to switch leads and once they've learned how to make that turn, I would phase that tunnel out as fast as possible. So our last slide is you want to work towards your goal spacing. So my goal spacing is 21 feet in between obstacles, and I want to work towards that. And so here I've moved the equipment further back. Further away, and I again am doing the same thing. I want to work on, I'm going to cross in front of the hoop, I'm going to cross behind the hoop, I'm going to add distance to this. We're going to add at some point, as my dog gets better and better, we add another jump or hoop back here, so it's 2 hoops into that switch, and really especially work on things where you're not always meeting your dog at that target. Right? If we pretend that there is a gambler's line right here, and you have to stay over here. So really, that's another thing you want to work on, is back to break that behavior down, make sure you're not lumping, and work on sending your dog 2 hoops and then switch out to that next hoop with you staying on this side of the line. And again, working with that target. And same thing I said in this previous slide, if your dog is having some issues, when you look at this, it's kind of a flat angle. If your dog is having a little bit of issues making that turn, just take that hoop and angle it so that they can have a better visual of that hoop. Move your target up here. There we go. Move your target up here so that they can have a nice visual where to go, and then slowly break that down to where you're back to doing this nice turn. I would definitely practice working it over here. Practice working down here. Work on every handling position you can possibly think of, so that your dog understands how to do that switch. It doesn't matter if they are, alongside you and they switch away. You're over on this side, you're over on this side and you switch and you end up here. However it may be, you want your dog to really to really understand that switch means, turn away from you and then drive. And that's the biggest thing is sometimes we teach switches, but we don't teach the drive afterwards. And I really want my dog to do that turn and drive to that target. So like I said, it's not, teaching sends and turnaways the way I do. There's not a magic wand or anything like that. It really is my biggest thing when I'm teaching sends and turnaways is breaking the behavior down. That to me is the magic wand of this whole deal. Because if we break things down into small pieces and build upon those small pieces, your dog will have a rock solid understanding of what a send means with body language and without, and what a turn away means. Even if you're 40 feet away, they will understand, yep, switch and drive. I feel that targeting gets us to that place if used properly, if used properly faded. And I also am a big believer in just breaking things down and spending time on each piece. Anyone who watched, who is in my Fenzi class for contacts, who's watched any of Tripp's training, he has fantastic contacts. And the reason he does is not a magic method, it's nothing like that. It's the fact that the behaviors were broke down into very small pieces, and he literally spent months learning the foundation. He never saw a piece of contact equipment for probably a minimum of 4 months. And he did all his foundation work on the ground, and then we took him to equipment. And I view this as the same way. I want my dog to have a full understanding of how to do these things in these little foundation exercises before I start asking for it in a trial or even in bigger sequences. And I always break things down, just break it down. Like I said, Hannah Brannigan teaches obedience, but her podcasts are extremely relevant to dog agility, and I highly recommend them. And I highly recommend the one that talks about splitting behaviors, because that is extremely relevant in agility, because we tend to want to lump this together. Oh, look, my dog did this switch, now let's see if he'll do it from 20 feet. And you want to really break everything down. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our cover page here. All right. Do we have any questions that haven't been asked yet? If we don't have anything, I'm going to go ahead and kind of do a little bit of a wrap up here, and then a little bit of our housekeeping. So if you have a question, just go ahead and type it out, and I'll get to it as we go. Like I said at the beginning of the webinar, I will send everybody the link to this so you can view it whenever you want. It usually takes, by the time, because I have to download it off of this software and then re-upload it to YouTube, it usually takes me about a day to get it up. If it's real fast, I can sometimes even get it back to you. It just kind of depends on how fast my internet's working and how fast the webinar software can get my stuff downloaded and then re-uploaded back up to YouTube. If you have any questions about anything we've done tonight and you didn't get a chance to ask them tonight, you can join my training group. It's on Facebook. It's Fluid Motion Training. I think if you go to facebook.com/Fluid Motion Training, I think that'll take you there. And it's just a Facebook group, and anybody who has joined a webinar, you've been to classes with me, anything like that, you can post videos there, ask questions, and I'll respond to them. So if you set up these exercises and you decide you want to, ask questions or send me a video to look at, you can post it right there in that group and I can take a look at it. Question, how do you turn the dog away when the dog is heading towards you? So that's still, so in my book, it's still a switch. I'm assuming you're talking about, let's see, I can do a little diagram here. If we reverse this diagram and we put the dog and handler up here, or the dog up here where the T is and the handler stays here, you're talking about the dog coming through these hoops toward handler and then going this way, correct? So that is something I practice, and I will actually, if you join that Fluid Motion Training group, I have a video that shows myself and Tripp practicing that. I will post it in there. I call it a front switch. You're basically bringing your dog down in towards you, and then switching them away. And so when I teach my dogs a switch, the switch means to turn away from me. It could mean turning away off my side, like what we talked about in this handling group, or it could mean turning off the front of me. So I'll link that video. I won't be able to grab it to put it in here right now, but I'll link that video to the Fluid Motion Training Group that shows Trip doing front switches. I used to call them backs as well. And all I did is I used switch instead of a new verbal for it. And it just tells my dog that you're turning off the front of my body and then driving forward. And the degree of my body tells my dog kind of where to go. Does that answer your question in hopefully a rambly, roundabout way? So yeah, if you have like that, you have questions, be sure to put them in the training group. I will link that video, and I'll probably do it right now as soon as I get out of here, so I don't forget. Anything in that training group, I can respond and all that sort of good stuff. If you have any issues with the download or anything like that, make sure and email me. And I think that just about covers it. So like I say, if you guys have any further questions or anything like that, just make sure and post them in there, and I will get to them as fast as I can. Thank you all so much for coming.